They tore down my grandfather's historic hand-built bridge, and in return, I turned their $1,007 million lakeside empire into a nightmare. 8 months ago, Cordelia Blackstone's exclusive resort was pure paradise. Celebrity weddings, champagne flowing on elegant patios, luxury yachts sparkling under the sun. Today, high-end teak furniture bakes in the heat, million-dollar boats sit stranded and tilting, and those once glamorous docks stand empty, haunted by silence where music and laughter used to fill the air. Cordelia, the arrogant HOA president obsessed with control, thought bulldozing my family's 40-year-old legacy bridge was just another power move. She had no idea who really held the keys to everything she valued most. As a third-generation landowner and licensed civil engineer who controls the upstream water rights, I knew exactly how to respond, perfectly within the law. What would you do if an entitled HOA destroyed something your grandfather built with his own hands? Drop your wildest neighbor revenge story below, and tell me, where are you watching from? My name's Jake Thornfield, and I'm a third-generation property owner at Willowmere Lake. 8 months ago, I thought I was just coming home to heal from a messy divorce. Turns out, I was walking into the fight of my life. My grandfather built our family's footbridge back in 1987. Every plank hand-cut, every nail hammered with the kind of pride you don't see anymore. The wood still smelled faintly of the old-growth cedar he'd insisted on using. That bridge wasn't just transportation. It was where I learned to fish, where I proposed to my ex-wife, where 3 generations of Thornfields found peace watching sunrise over calm water. After my divorce papers were signed and my savings looked like a crime scene, I moved back to the family property. 12 acres of prime lakefront that grandfather bought when land was cheap and neighbors actually knew each other's names. The bridge had weathered 40 years of storms. It wasn't going anywhere. Enter Cordelia Blackstone. Picture every HOA horror story you've heard, then add a pearl necklace and a god complex. At 52, she'd transformed from disgraced ex-city councilwoman into self-appointed queen of Willowmere. Her crown jewel? Blackstone Lakeside Resort, where desperate couples paid 30 grand for waterfront weddings. You could smell her coming from 50 yards, some chemical floral perfume that made your eyes water. She drove a spotless white Mercedes and had this politician's smile that never reached her calculating eyes. The kind of woman who'd measure your grass with a ruler, then write you up for being an 1/8 inch too long. 3 weeks after I moved back, the certified letter arrived. Paper crackling in my trembling hands. Bridge violation notice. Unauthorized structure impedes lakeside beautification initiative. 30 days for voluntary removal or 500 daily fines. My 40-year-old bridge was suddenly unauthorized. Some obscure 2019 HOA amendment, passed while previous owners were dying in hospice, declared my family legacy an eyesore. I ran my fingers along those weathered railings, feeling decades of carved initials and smooth, worn handholds. This wasn't about building codes. My bridge blocked optimal photo angles for wedding photographers. Cordelia had promised clients she'd remove that rustic obstruction soon. Nothing says romance like bulldozing someone's heritage, right? The stakes were brutal. Removal would cost $8,000, money the divorce had already stolen. But Cordelia's targeting longtime residents systematically, manufacturing violations to force people out for her developer friends. The community split predictably. Old-timers like Margaret Weston supported me, understanding what that bridge represented. Newer residents, mansion owners with 7-figure portfolios, sided with Cordelia. They wanted pristine views and property values history be damned. During one surprise visit, Cordelia dropped her real threat. Other violations might surface if this bridge situation isn't resolved. Her voice carried that special politician's blend of honey and arsenic. The irony was perfect. She used the view my family's property created to justify destroying what made it possible. Here's what Cordelia didn't know. I'm not just some heartbroken divorcee hiding by the lake. I'm a licensed civil engineer specializing in water management systems. I understand how lakes work, how dams function, how century-old water rights get inherited through family trusts. That night, sitting on grandfather's bridge with the taste of lake mist on my lips, watching expensive lights twinkle across Cordelia's resort windows, a dangerous engineer's thought crystallized. What if the woman who thought she controlled this lake had never bothered reading the original property deeds? What if she'd never checked who actually owned the upstream dam controls? As I listened to the distant sound of wedding music drifting across the water, laughter and champagne toasts celebrating love on stolen time, I realized Cordelia had made a fatal assumption. She thought destroying my bridge would be easy because she thought I was powerless. But I wasn't just defending a bridge. I was defending 40 years of family legacy, and I had tools she'd never imagined. The real question wasn't whether I could stop her. It was whether she'd figure out what she'd started before it was too late. Cordelia didn't waste time. 48 hours after my bridge deadline passed, she called an emergency HOA meeting. Of course, she scheduled it for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, when working people couldn't attend. The community center reeked of stale coffee and political ambition as I walked in. Cordelia had packed the room with her supporters, recent transplants who'd bought lakefront mansions and treated longtime residents like we were some quaint tourist attraction. She'd prepared professionally printed presentations because nothing says emergency like laminated charts. The title slide made my blood boil. Willowmere Aesthetic Standards, Preserving Property Values Through Heritage Management. Heritage management. Like my grandfather's craftsmanship was some eyesore that needed managing. Cordelia clicked through photos of my bridge, each labeled with buzzwords like structural hazard and period inappropriate. She'd somehow made 40 years of weathered cedar look like a condemned crack house. The woman had missed her calling in propaganda. This unauthorized structure compromises our community's premium positioning, she announced, adjusting her pearl necklace like she was adjusting a crown. Potential buyers expect consistent architectural standards. Margaret Weston, bless her 70-year-old heart, raised a trembling hand. That bridge has been there since before half you people moved here, which is precisely the problem. Cordelia smiled that razor-sharp politician's grin. Grandfathered structures create legal vulnerabilities for our association. The motion passed 7-4. Authorization for immediate abatement of my family's legacy. I could taste the metallic bitterness of rage coating my tongue as I listened to applause from people who'd never built anything with their own hands. But anger makes you stupid, and I'm an engineer. Engineers solve problems with research, not emotion. I spent the next 3 days in the county records office, breathing decades of dust and bureaucratic neglect. The filing cabinets creaked like old bones when opened, releasing that distinctive smell of yellowed paper and forgotten dreams. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps while I photographed every document related to Willowmere's development. Then I found it. The original 1987 HOA charter, the one Cordelia had apparently never bothered reading. Buried in Section 12.3. Pre-existing structures of historical significance shall be exempt from future aesthetic regulations, provided continuous use can be demonstrated. My bridge wasn't just grandfathered, it was legally protected. Cordelia's entire case was built on willful ignorance. I remembered something from law school courses I'd taken for my engineering degree. Structures with continuous use exceeding 30 years often gain protections that supersede HOA authority, even retroactive regulations. My grandfather had unknowingly created an ironclad defense just by building something meant to last. But that wasn't the best part. The retired county engineer who'd signed my grandfather's original permits was still alive. Frank Morrison, 83 years old and sharp as a tack, remembered every detail of that bridge construction. Your grandfather insisted on engineering specs that exceeded county requirements by 300%, Frank told me over bitter diner coffee that could strip paint. Said he was building it for his grandchildren's grandchildren. That bridge could survive a nuclear winter. Armed with Frank's testimony and the original charter language, I felt like David picking up his slingshot. But while I was building my legal defense, I'd stumbled across something far more interesting about Cordelia's precious resort. The county planning office had no environmental impact assessment for her new conference center, that glass-walled addition she'd built 2 years ago for corporate retreats. You know what else they had no record of? Permits for that Instagram-famous lakefront gazebo where influencers posed for engagement photos. The one she charged couples an extra $5,000 to use. The same gazebo that extended 12 feet into protected wetlands. I sat in my truck outside the planning office, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the permit violation report I'd just filed. The irony was delicious. While Cordelia manufactured violations against my legally protected bridge, she'd been operating actual illegal structures for 2 years. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy Remy, my surveyor buddy. Got your property boundary report, you're not going to believe this. Tommy's findings confirmed what Frank had told me. My bridge sat entirely within my property lines, a full 12 feet from any HOA common area. Cordelia's enforcement company had fabricated their measurements. But Tommy had discovered something else that made my engineer's brain start calculating possibilities I'd never considered. Those original 1987 property deeds included something called Riparian Water Management Authority. My grandfather hadn't just bought lakefront property. He'd retained rights to control the lake's water levels for environmental and infrastructure maintenance. As I drove home past Cordelia's resort, watching wealthy guests sip champagne on patios built over illegal wetlands extensions, a dangerous thought crystallized. She'd declared war on my family's 40-year legacy based on manufactured violations and falsified surveys. Time to show her what actual violations looked like. The question was, how far was I willing to go to protect what my grandfather built? Looking at those resort lights reflecting off water he'd helped manage for decades, I realized the answer was simple: as far as necessary. Cordelia's response came faster than I expected. 3 days after my permit violation report hit the county planning office, she escalated to professional intimidation. Lakeshore Compliance Solutions arrived in a black SUV at 7 a.m. sharp. 3 men in matching polo shirts with clipboards and attitudes like some bargain bin version of federal agents. They set up surveying equipment on what they claimed was common area near my bridge, their diesel generator coughing black smoke into the crisp morning air. Their leader, a sweaty guy named Rick with the personality of a parking meter, informed me they were conducting an official boundary assessment. The man reeked of cheap cologne and cheaper intentions. "Ma'am hired us to get to the truth," Rick announced, wiping sweat with a dirty rag. "Says you've been trespassing on community land for decades." I watched them work for exactly 37 minutes before calling Tommy Remy. While Rick's crew measured everything except what actually mattered, Tommy arrived with his certified equipment and that quiet confidence that comes from actually knowing your job. "Mind if I observe?" Tommy asked politely. "Professional curiosity." Rick shrugged. "Big mistake." Within an hour, Tommy had documented Rick's crew using uncalibrated equipment and measuring from decorative stones Cordelia had installed last year, not the original 1987 survey pins. Their findings claimed my bridge extended 6 inches into common area. Tommy's certified survey told the truth. My bridge sat 12 feet within my property lines. Rick hadn't made an error. He'd committed fraud. I remembered a case study from engineering school about property disputes. When companies aren't licensed by the state, their official measurements carry zero legal weight. It's like having your neighbor's kid measure your house with a broken ruler, then calling it science. Rick specialized in manufacturing problems for HOA presidents who paid cash. But Cordelia's theater wasn't finished. By noon, bright orange condemned signs appeared on my bridge, positioned for maximum visibility from her resort's premium suites. Her wedding packages suddenly included scenic impairment accommodation, an extra $500 because guests might glimpse my family's safety hazard. She was literally charging couples extra money for my bridge existing in their photos. The audacity was breathtaking. That afternoon brought a certified letter from Blackstone Property Management demanding immediate removal of unauthorized signage, structures, and impediments to community aesthetic standards. The legal letterhead was impressive. Too bad it came from a law firm that specialized in intimidating elderly homeowners. I filed complaints with the state contractor licensing board that evening, documenting Rick's falsified measurements. The fresh ink on official forms reminded me of grandfather's workshop, where he'd kept meticulous records of every permit, records that were about to save my bridge. The community response surprised everyone, especially Cordelia. Margaret Weston activated a phone tree among longtime residents that worked like a military operation. Father Rodriguez mentioned our situation during Sunday announcements. Within days, the local newspaper picked up the story. Historic bridge under siege by HOA enforcement. Reporter Sarah Kim had done her homework. Her article quoted Frank Morrison about my bridge's engineering excellence and included a sidebar about recent HOA overreach statewide. The online comments exploded with similar stories. Cordelia's tactics weren't unique to Willowmere. Social media amplified everything beyond our little lake community. Save Willowmere Bridge started trending locally, with photos contrasting grandfather's craftsmanship against Cordelia's gaudy resort additions. Comments pointed out the irony. The woman-destroying period-inappropriate architecture had built a glass conference center that looked like a failed shopping mall. Then came Tommy's discovery that changed everything. "Jake, you need to see this," he called Thursday morning, voice tight with controlled anger. Lakeshore Compliance Solutions isn't licensed for surveying. They're a property management company owned by Cordelia's brother-in-law. The pieces clicked like tumblers in a lock. Cordelia had hired family to manufacture evidence against my bridge. The same company that had, coincidentally, appraised her resort at inflated values for insurance purposes. She wasn't targeting just my bridge, she was running systematic fraud, creating problems she could profit from solving. 3 other longtime residents had received similar violation notices, all from the same unlicensed enforcement company. As evening settled over the lake, I sat on my bridge listening to wedding music drift from Cordelia's latest event. The sound of champagne glasses clinking mixed with the gentle lap of water against the shore. Sounds that had provided the soundtrack to my family's 40 years here. But tonight, those familiar sounds carried a different meaning. This wasn't about property lines or aesthetic standards anymore. This was about corruption disguised as community improvement, profit prioritized over people's heritage. Cordelia had made one crucial miscalculation. She thought targeting an engineer would be easy because engineers follow rules. What she didn't understand was that engineers also know how to expose the rules she'd been breaking all along, and I was just getting started. Cordelia's desperation revealed itself when she pulled her dirtiest card, manufactured safety concerns. If she couldn't prove property violations, she'd create an emergency. Tuesday morning brought another unwelcome visitor. A man in a hard hat claiming to be a certified structural engineer conducting an emergency inspection of my bridge. Behind him lurked Rick from Lakeshore Compliance, now armed with a camera and impressive-looking paperwork. "Anonymous tip about imminent collapse risk," the engineer announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a seasoned con artist. "Public safety requires immediate assessment." The morning air carried the acrid smell of his nervous sweat mixed with Rick's overpowering cologne as they set up equipment that looked official but felt wrong. I watched this theatrical performance for exactly 10 minutes before asking to see credentials. His hesitation told me everything. The man's structural engineering license came from a diploma mill in Nevada, and his inspection toolkit consisted of a hammer, a measuring tape, and a moisture meter he clearly couldn't operate. I'd seen more sophisticated engineering at middle school science fairs. But they performed their charade anyway, photographing non-existent stress fractures and documenting dangerous deterioration visible only to their fraudulent eyes. The hollow sound of their hammer tapping against 40-year-old cedar that could outlast them both would have been comical if it weren't so insulting. Their report arrived by certified mail that afternoon. Imminent collapse risk to public safety requires emergency evacuation of all structures within 50 feet of bridge supports. Apparently, the county sheriff's office had received an anonymous tip about a dangerous structure threatening lake navigation. 24 hours to evacuate my own property. Even for Cordelia, the audacity was breathtaking. I spent that evening in grandfather's workshop, surrounded by his engineering manuals and the lingering smell of wood shavings in every corner. My hands trembled, not from fear but from rage, as I pulled out my real structural engineering credentials, earned through years studying dam inspections and water management systems. Engineers who falsify safety reports don't just lose their licenses, they face criminal charges and personal liability for any disasters their lies might cause. In my profession, integrity isn't just ethics, it's literally life and death when bridges and dams are involved. These fraudsters had picked the wrong target. By morning, I'd completed a comprehensive bridge analysis that would make any legitimate engineer proud. Every joint, support beam, and connection point documented with precision that Rick's crew couldn't spell. My bridge wasn't just safe, it exceeded modern engineering codes by 200%. The State Engineering Board was personally offended when I reported the fraudulent inspection. Apparently, structural engineering fraud was epidemic in our region, and they were prosecuting aggressively. The woman who took my complaint promised that fake credentials would result in criminal charges. Meanwhile, community support grew exponentially. Margaret Weston's petition drive had collected over 300 signatures. Father Rodriguez convinced the elementary school to create a Heroes of Willowmere display featuring grandfather and other community builders. Local veterans discovered grandfather had served in Korea, news to me, and adopted our cause as honoring military sacrifice. The newspaper published a follow-up with the headline, "Veterans Memorial Bridge Faces Demolition," complete with grandfather's army photos. Regional news stations embraced the David versus Goliath narrative, framing it as ordinary citizens fighting institutional corruption. Sarah Kim's original article had generated thousands of shares, inspiring copycat stories about HOA abuse across 3 counties. But while building public support, my investigation had attracted far more dangerous attention for Cordelia. The State Environmental Protection Agency had noticed my violation reports about her resort's wetlands encroachment. Environmental crimes aren't civil infractions, they're federal offenses. Prosecutors aggressively pursue businesses that contaminate protected waterways, especially profitable operations that market themselves as eco-friendly while secretly poisoning the environment they exploit. Thursday's game changer arrived in an unmarked sedan, EPA officials with water testing equipment responding to anonymous tips about unpermitted septic systems and suspicious runoff from wedding events. The sight of federal investigators sampling water 50 feet from Cordelia's illegal gazebo was poetry in motion. Perfect irony. While she manufactured fake emergencies about my bridge, real investigators were documenting actual environmental crimes beneath her manicured lawns and premium event spaces. That evening, as I watched EPA officials work by floodlight near Cordelia's potentially criminal patios, my phone rang. Margaret Weston's voice carried barely contained excitement. "Jake, you need to know something extraordinary about those original property deeds." She'd been researching at the courthouse, following paper trails connecting my family to Willowmere's founding. What she'd discovered would revolutionize everything, not just my bridge defense, but the entire power dynamic of this war. "Your grandfather didn't just own waterfront property," she said, words tumbling with excitement. "He retained the water rights, all of them. And Jake, those rights were never transferred to the county or HOA. They're still in your family trust." As wedding guests celebrated on Cordelia's environmentally destructive patios, dancing to music that couldn't quite mask the sound of federal investigators documenting crimes, I realized the battlefield had shifted completely. She'd tried destroying my bridge to protect her profits. Now I held power to eliminate something infinitely more valuable, the very lake that made her empire possible. Margaret met me at grandfather's workshop the next morning, clutching a manila folder thick enough to choke a lawyer. The musty smell of old paper mixed with her thermos coffee as she spread evidence across his scarred workbench, dust motes dancing in morning light that filtered through windows he'd never quite gotten around to cleaning. "I've been living in the courthouse basement since Tuesday," she said, adjusting reading glasses held together with electrical tape. "Jake, your grandfather wasn't just a bridge builder. He was a founding member of this HOA, and he played a game nobody else even knew existed." The original charter documents revealed a story that made my hands shake. When developers proposed Willowmere Lake as a residential community in 1985, they'd needed someone with water management expertise for environmental permits. My grandfather, fresh from Army Corps of Engineers, had been their consultant, but he'd been chessmaster smart about it. Section 15, Margaret pointed to faded typewriter text that smelled like decades in storage. Historic Preservation Clause. Any structure existing 25 years or more gains permanent protected status, immune from future aesthetic or structural regulations. He'd written that protection himself, embedding it so deep in legal language that future HOA boards would never think to challenge it. My grandfather had literally legislated Cordelia's defeat 40 years before she was born. But the real bombshell was buried deeper. Hidden in property transfer agreements was something called Riparian Water Management Authority, technical language so mind-numbing that 3 decades of lawyers had apparently used it as a cure for insomnia. My grandfather hadn't just kept water rights, he'd retained operational control over the entire lake ecosystem, including the dam that fed it. "Jesus, Jake," Margaret whispered, her voice carrying the awe of someone who'd just discovered buried treasure. "Your family doesn't just own 12 acres, you control every drop of water in this lake." The implications hit like a physical blow. Every wedding pavilion, every yacht club dock, every $1 million mansion existed purely because my grandfather allowed their lake to exist. Cordelia's $1.7 million resort was built on water that belonged to my family. I grabbed his old workshop manual, pages I'd dismissed as boring maintenance notes. Reading with new eyes, I realized it was actually a dam operation guide. Water release protocols, seasonal management procedures, environmental controls, all documented in his careful engineer's handwriting, all legally mine to execute. The emotional revelation came through his journal entries, words that made my chest tight with understanding. The bridge isn't really about crossing water, he'd written in 1987. It's about proving that some things last longer than money, that community roots grow deeper than corporate profits. Other entries revealed a man I'd never fully known. He'd anonymously funded 3 families' legal fights against early HOA corruption, always operating from shadows. He'd bought extra property parcels just to prevent overdevelopment. His bridge wasn't family legacy. It was his monument to the idea that ordinary people could outsmart institutional greed. The legal framework was bulletproof. Water rights predating municipal incorporation couldn't be challenged. State environmental law actually encouraged seasonal drainage for ecosystem management. Jefferson County precedent had established that riparian authority superseded all local regulations when exercised for conservation purposes. Sitting surrounded by tools that still smelled like his pipe tobacco, I finally understood the magnificent trap he'd constructed. The bridge was bait, designed to attract exactly the kind of attack Cordelia had launched. But while greedy developers focused on the obvious target, they'd never noticed the hidden weapon. He'd spent 4 decades building the perfect legal nuclear option, disguised as boring paperwork. Cordelia thought destroying my bridge would crush community resistance to her empire. She'd never imagined that touching my family's legacy would hand me the power to make her empire disappear entirely. The question wasn't whether I could drain her precious lake. The question was whether I was my grandfather's grandson. The next morning, I called Tommy Remy with 4 words that would change everything. We need to talk. Tommy arrived within an hour, followed by Margaret carrying a thermos that smelled like salvation, and Father Rodriguez clutching a worn legal pad like it contained state secrets. Danny McBride's contractor truck rumbled up just as I was spreading grandfather's damn operation manuals across the workshop table. The familiar smell of old motor oil and wood shavings mixed with Margaret's coffee as my unlikely war council gathered around tools that hadn't moved since grandfather's death. Danny picked up a worn pipe wrench, testing its weight like a warrior examining his sword. "So we're really doing this?" he asked, voice carrying that mix of excitement and terror that comes with crossing lines you can't uncross. "Cordelia declared war on 40 years of family history," I said, running my fingers across grandfather's faded operational protocols. "She just doesn't realize I've been holding the nuclear codes this whole time." Margaret spread her courthouse research beside the technical manuals, her retired county clerk expertise finally finding its moment. "The environmental protection angle is bulletproof," she explained, adjusting those tape-repaired glasses. "Seasonal lake drawdowns aren't destruction, they're restoration. Fish populations recover, invasive species die off, accumulated sediments get natural cleaning." I remembered my water management coursework from engineering school. Lakes are dynamic systems that actually benefit from periodic drainage. It's like giving an ecosystem a deep breath after years of stagnation. The irony was perfect. Saving the environment would destroy Cordelia's profits. Father Rodriguez leaned forward, 30 years of community organizing suddenly relevant. "Timing is surgical precision. Cordelia's got the Harrison Bentley wedding this weekend, 300 guests, Society magazine coverage, 50,000 in revenue." Tommy pulled up satellite imagery on his tablet showing dam positioning relative to resort infrastructure. Controlled release over 48 hours prevents downstream flooding while maximizing your leverage. His engineer's precision made environmental warfare sound almost clinical. Danny mapped logistics with contractor efficiency. "Dam controls haven't operated in 15 years, but your grandfather maintained everything like it was mission critical. I can test manual systems without anyone knowing what we're planning." The operational beauty was its complete legality. Environmental lake restoration plan filed with state agencies, citing invasive zebra mussel discoveries and sediment concerns. Every form properly submitted, every protocol followed religiously. We spent 4 hours gaming scenarios like General Staff Planning D-Day. Margaret researched precedents where water authority trumped commercial interests, found 14 cases across neighboring states, all favoring riparian rights over business profits. Tommy calculated drainage rates that would strand floating infrastructure while preventing emergency response triggers. Father Rodriguez crafted our narrative strategy. This is proactive environmental stewardship, not revenge. You're protecting the lake's future, not destroying someone's empire. Perception drives everything. Danny's construction company would obtain permits for lake bottom restoration work during drainage. Everything documented, everything legitimate. everything designed to make legal challenges suicidal for opposing attorneys. The psychological warfare was equally calculated. No direct warnings to Cordelia. Let official notifications speak through bureaucratic channels. Her political arrogance would dismiss environmental paperwork as routine hassle until water dropped below her dock lines. Margaret discovered perfect precedent. 1987 Jefferson County ruling where water authority drained private lakes to enforce environmental compliance. Court specifically stated that commercial operations dependent on water access assume all risks related to legitimate riparian management decisions. As shadows lengthened across the workshop floor, we finalized timing. Monday, environmental plan submitted. Tuesday, 7-day notification period begins. Wednesday through Friday, media positioning as ecological necessity. Monday following, dam operation commences, exactly 48 hours before Cordelia's premium wedding weekend. Tommy would legitimize my role through environmental consulting credentials. Margaret prepared documentation of Cordelia's violations justifying urgent intervention. Father Rodriguez organized community support, framing actions as protecting Willomere's heritage for future generations. Danny's crew would prepare equipment and test systems while maintaining operational security. We'd document everything for legal challenges, creating unassailable evidence of proper environmental stewardship. The personal element hit me as I pulled out grandfather's work gloves, leather worn smooth by decades maintaining systems Cordelia never knew existed. These hands had built defenses against exactly the corruption now threatening our community. My team gathered final assignments, each carrying specific responsibilities for the week ahead, when Danny paused at the workshop door, his contractor's pragmatism cutting through our excitement. "Jake, you realize there's no retreat after this? Once that water starts dropping, Cordelia's going to unleash every weapon she's got." I surveyed the workshop where grandfather had spent 40 years preparing for this exact confrontation. Tools organized with military precision, manuals updated through decades of quiet vigilance, legal protections embedded so deep that corruption couldn't touch them. The musty air still carried traces of his pipe tobacco, reminding me that some battles choose their warriors across generations. He'd built this moment, the knowledge, the authority, the moral justification, and hidden it in plain sight for exactly the right time. She already unleashed everything she had, I said, feeling grandfather's presence in every carefully maintained tool and documented procedure. Now she gets to learn what 40 years of patient preparation looks like. Cordelia's panic became visible the moment my environmental restoration plan hit the state agency's public filing system. Tuesday morning brought frantic phone calls to the county commissioner, emergency meetings with her lawyer, and desperate attempts to contact anyone with environmental authority who might owe her favors. By Wednesday, she'd crossed into felony territory. County Inspector Bill Morrison called me personally, his gravelly voice carrying the disgust of a 30-year veteran who'd seen corruption but never this brazen. She offered me $20,000 in cash to delay environmental assessments until after wedding season, actually opened a briefcase full of hundreds like some discount mob movie. The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth as I documented everything, adding Bill's sworn statement to my evidence file. Bribing public officials wasn't just corruption. It was a career-ending felony that would obliterate her remaining political connections. But Cordelia's desperation drove her beyond simple bribery into full-character assassination mode. Thursday brought whispered rumors about my post-divorce mental health, suggestions that I was unstable and threatening property values through erratic environmental extremism. She'd hired Curtis Vance, a sleazy ex-cop who specialized in manufacturing scandals for wealthy clients. Curtis spent 2 days photographing my grocery runs, interviewing neighbors about my suspicious behavior, and attempting to access my medical records through methods that would make legitimate investigators vomit. The irony was poetry. While paying someone to document my stability, Cordelia was publicly demonstrating her own psychological meltdown. Margaret intercepted 3 separate attempts to fast-track emergency HOA powers expansion that would somehow override state environmental law. Good luck with that, princess. Friday night delivered the sabotage attempt I'd been expecting. Danny's security cameras caught them at 2 a.m., Rick and 2 accomplices attempting to vandalize my bridge with crowbars and a reciprocating saw. The harsh sound of metal scraping against 40-year-old cedar echoed across the lake as they tried creating actual structural damage they could photograph as evidence. I watched the live feed from my bedroom, coffee growing cold as I documented their criminal incompetence. Rick's sweaty face glowed under streetlight while he attacked grandfather's engineering with tools he clearly couldn't operate. His nervous accomplices kept checking over their shoulders as Rick attempted to create dangerous deterioration with all the finesse of a drunk rhinoceros. They managed to scratch some paint and dent a few boards before surrendering to superior construction. Apparently, a bridge engineered to survive nuclear winter wasn't impressed by Rick's Harbor Freight power tools. Instead of calling police immediately, I let them finish their pathetic demolition derby, then shared the footage with Sarah Kim at the newspaper. Her Sunday article, HOA President's Family Caught Vandalizing Historic Bridge, included frame-by-frame photos of Rick's Midnight Incompetence Festival. The community response was volcanic. Even Cordelia's supporters couldn't defend midnight vandalism by her relatives. The HOA emergency hotline received 47 resignation demands before noon Sunday, but Cordelia's final gambit revealed the true scope of her political corruption network. Monday morning brought State Senator Patricia Hawkins, Cordelia's former mentor from city council days, arriving in a black sedan like she was conducting legitimate state business. Senator Hawkins' pitch was smooth, practiced, and utterly criminal. Delay lake drainage in exchange for fast-tracked state funding for community projects. Her expensive perfume couldn't mask the stench of quid pro quo corruption as she offered taxpayer bribes to protect Cordelia's wedding revenue. "Environmental restoration is admirable," she said, politician's smile never wavering. "But timing matters. Perhaps autumn would be more appropriate for such dramatic interventions." I recorded every word. The mini twist that changed everything came when Senator Hawkins inadvertently revealed Cordelia's real plan. This wasn't just about protecting wedding revenue. Cordelia was using HOA authority to force out longtime residents so she could flip their properties to a luxury development consortium that included the senator's husband. My bridge wasn't blocking wedding photos. It was blocking a multi-million-dollar gentrification scheme that would transform Willowmere into an exclusive enclave for political cronies and their wealthy friends. Political corruption at the federal level meant FBI jurisdiction. Senators trading official favors for private benefits faced criminal prosecution, especially with audio evidence and witness testimony documenting the conspiracy. That afternoon, I uploaded everything to the FBI's public corruption hotline. Senator Hawkins' bribery attempt, Bill Morrison's inspector testimony, Rick's vandalism footage, falsified engineering reports, environmental violations, the entire criminal enterprise documented like evidence at trial. As Monday evening approached with my notification period expiring at midnight, I sat on grandfather's bridge listening to wedding music drift across water that would soon be gone. Another $30,000 celebration built on corruption and environmental destruction. The last party before justice arrived. Tomorrow, dam gates would open for the first time in 15 years. The question wasn't whether Cordelia would survive the drainage. It was whether her entire criminal conspiracy would collapse when the water disappeared. Justice, I'd learned, flows downhill just like water. And at midnight, I was opening the floodgates on 40 years of patient preparation. Time to see if Cordelia's empire could survive without its foundation. Cordelia's final desperate move came at 11:47 p.m. Monday night, 13 minutes before my legal notification period expired and dam operations could begin. Her high-priced lawyer, Marcus Webb from the state capitol, had filed an emergency injunction claiming I lacked proper environmental authority despite crystal-clear documentation. The courthouse clerk who called sounded annoyed at being dragged from bed for what she clearly recognized as legal theater. "Emergency hearing scheduled for 6 a.m. Tuesday," she said. "Judge Martinez doesn't appreciate midnight legal stunts, but protocol requires consideration." I spent those dark hours before dawn in grandfather's workshop, reviewing dam operation procedures one final time. The metallic taste of coffee mixed with anticipation as I traced water release protocols he'd maintained for 40 years. Every valve, every control, every safety measure documented with engineer's precision. Danny arrived at 5 a.m. with Tommy and Father Rodriguez, their faces grim but determined in the pre-dawn darkness. Margaret pulled up moments later, clutching a thermos and a briefcase full of legal ammunition. Webb's reputation is built on intimidating small-town opponents, she said, adjusting those tape-repaired glasses. But he's never faced a case where his client is simultaneously under FBI investigation for political corruption. The courthouse smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams as we gathered for what would determine Willomere's future. Judge Martinez, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years of cutting through legal bullshit, listened to Webb's theatrical presentation about environmental terrorism and economic sabotage. Webb presented enlarged photos of my bridge, claiming its imminent removal proved I was unstable and unfit to exercise water management authority. He'd somehow obtained copies of my divorce papers, suggesting that personal financial distress motivated revenge against successful community members. The smell of his desperation was stronger than his expensive cologne. When my turn came, Margaret presented our evidence with surgical precision: original property deeds, grandfather's environmental credentials, state agency approvals, and comprehensive documentation of Cordelia's criminal violations. Judge Martinez's eyebrows rose higher with each revelation. The turning point came when Margaret introduced our surprise witness, Dr. Elizabeth Remy, Tommy's sister and a state environmental biologist who'd been studying Willomere's ecosystem degradation for 2 years. Mr. Thornfield's drainage plan isn't just legally justified, Dr. Remy testified, her scientific authority cutting through Webb's legal smoke. It's environmentally necessary. Invasive zebra mussel populations have reached critical levels, and accumulated pollutants from unauthorized resort activities pose genuine ecosystem threats. Webb's objections crumbled when Dr. Remy presented water quality data showing dangerous contamination levels near Cordelia's illegal septic systems. The judge's decision was swift and brutal. Emergency injunction denied, environmental authority confirmed, drainage operations approved to proceed immediately. But Cordelia wasn't done fighting. As we left the courthouse, she appeared with a local news crew and 3 county commissioners she'd somehow roused from their morning coffee. Her final performance was Academy Award worthy, tears flowing as she described my vendetta against her family business and the economic devastation my environmental extremism would cause. "This man is using government power to destroy jobs and community prosperity," she sobbed for the cameras. All because his family's unsafe bridge was rightfully condemned. The irony was perfect. A woman under FBI investigation for corruption portraying herself as the victim of governmental abuse. But her media blitz backfired spectacularly when Sarah Kim asked the question that ended everything. "Mrs. Blackstone, are you aware that your resort's unpermitted septic systems are currently being investigated by the EPA for illegal discharge into protected waterways?" Cordelia's fake tears dried instantly, replaced by the cold calculation I'd seen when she first targeted my bridge. "No comment," she snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. The community had gathered at the lake by the time I reached the dam controls, 200 people forming a circle around the historic equipment grandfather had maintained in pristine condition. Veterans held American flags, children carried hand-drawn signs supporting environmental protection, and even some of Cordelia's former allies stood with us. At exactly noon, with cameras rolling and the community watching, I placed my hands on the controls grandfather had operated for decades. The metal was warm from morning sun, worn smooth by his careful maintenance. "This lake belongs to our community, not to corruption," I said, my voice carrying across water that would soon begin its journey downstream. "Today, we restore what greed has poisoned." The first valve opened with the deep groan of machinery awakening from 15 years of sleep. Water began flowing through channels grandfather had designed, following paths he'd calculated to protect downstream communities while draining the lake that sustained Cordelia's empire. As the first visible drop in water level appeared near her resort's boat docks, Cordelia's face transformed from artificial grief to genuine terror. She finally understood that 40 years of patient preparation had led to this moment. Her empire built on corruption was about to become a mud pit, and there wasn't a lawyer, politician, or bribe large enough to stop the flow of justice. The water was going down, and her time was up. Dawn broke on Drainage Day with the largest crowd Willowmere had seen since the 4th of July festival. Media trucks lined the access road, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like technological prayers. State environmental officials clustered around monitoring equipment while sheriff's deputies maintained order among the growing assembly. I stood beside grandfather's dam controls wearing his old work shirt. the one that still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and honest labor. The metal wheels he'd turned countless times felt warm under my palms, worn smooth by 40 years of careful maintenance. Doctor. Elizabeth Remy checked her water quality monitors one final time, her scientific equipment humming quietly in the morning air. Invasive species population confirms emergency drainage protocols are not only justified but environmentally critical, she announced to the assembled crowd. That's when Cordelia arrived. Her white Mercedes screeched into the gravel parking area, followed by a black town car carrying Marcus Webb and a camera crew from the state capitol. She'd orchestrated this final confrontation for maximum media impact, betting that public pressure would somehow override legal authority and environmental necessity. "Stop this madness," she shrieked, her perfectly styled hair already showing stress fractures as she marched toward the dam controls. "This man is destroying our community out of personal spite." Sheriff's Deputy Karen Walsh stepped between Cordelia and the equipment, her hand resting casually on her weapon. "Ma'am, Mr. Thornfield has full legal authority to proceed with approved environmental restoration." Webb tried his courtroom theatrics for the cameras. "This is economic terrorism disguised as environmentalism. Mr. Thornfield's vendetta against successful business owners threatens our entire tourism economy." But Margaret Weston had anticipated this performance. She stepped forward carrying a manila folder thick with documentation, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades fighting institutional corruption. "Mr. Webb, are you aware your client is currently under FBI investigation for political corruption, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit fraud?" The crowd's murmur turned deadly silent. Even the media crews stopped their chatter. Webb's face went pale. Those are unsubstantiated allegations." "Actually," came a new voice from behind the crowd, "they're federal charges." Special Agent Patricia Morrison of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit stepped into the circle, her credentials gleaming in the morning sun. Behind her walked two more agents and an EPA enforcement officer carrying arrest warrants. "Cordelia Blackstone, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit bribery of public officials, environmental crimes under the Clean Water Act, and violations of federal racketeering statutes." The sound of handcuffs clicking onto Cordelia's wrists echoed across the water like a gunshot. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled completely as reality crashed through her entitled worldview. "You can't do this!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I know people, I have connections. Senator Hawkins will—" "Senator Hawkins was arrested this morning," Agent Morrison said calmly, "along with her husband and 3 members of the Luxury Development Consortium. Your phone records were very helpful." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. 40 years of community frustration with HOA corruption and political favoritism exploded in a cathartic celebration that shook leaves from nearby trees. But the most beautiful moment came when Marcus Webb, the high-priced lawyer who'd spent hours painting me as an unstable environmental terrorist, quietly approached with his head down. "Mr. Thornfield," he said, his voice barely audible above the celebration. "My client, my former client, clearly misrepresented the facts of this case. Your actions appear to be not only legal, but commendable." I looked at the man who'd tried to destroy my family's legacy in court just hours earlier. The irony was perfect. Cordelia's own lawyer was now acknowledging what grandfather had built 4 decades ago, an ironclad legal framework that put community welfare above individual greed. "Some things matter more than money," I said, placing my hand back on the dam controls. My grandfather understood that. Today we honor his wisdom. We honor his... With Agent Morrison documenting the proceedings for federal evidence and Dr. Remy confirming environmental necessity, I began the controlled drainage that would restore Willowmere Lake's natural ecosystem while ending Cordelia's corrupt empire. Water flowed through channels grandfather had engineered, following paths calculated to maximize environmental benefit while minimizing downstream impact. The sound was like justice itself, steady, inexorable, unstoppable. As the first boats began settling onto muddy lake bottom and expensive resort furniture tilted into useless positions, I felt grandfather's presence stronger than ever. He'd built this moment, the legal authority, the environmental justification, the community support, and hidden it in plain sight for exactly the right time. The crowd cheered as Cordelia was led to the FBI vehicle, her pearl necklace catching sunlight one last time before disappearing behind tinted windows. Her empire built on corruption was literally drying up, and the community she'd tried to destroy was celebrating its liberation. Justice, it turned out, really did flow downhill, and today the floodgates of 40 years' preparation had finally opened. 3 months after the water stopped flowing, Willowmere Lake began its remarkable transformation. The exposed lake bottom revealed decades of environmental damage that Cordelia's resort had hidden beneath pristine surface waters. EPA cleanup crews found illegal septic lines, buried construction debris, and chemical contamination that would have poisoned our ecosystem for generations. The drainage I'd initiated to save my bridge had accidentally uncovered evidence that led to federal environmental restoration funding worth $2.3 million. Dr. Elizabeth Remy's team removed 7 tons of invasive zebra mussels, cleared accumulated sediment from natural spawning areas, and installed improved water circulation systems. When we refilled the lake 6 weeks later, using grandfather's carefully engineered water management protocols, the transformation was miraculous. The water ran clearer than anyone could remember. Fish populations exploded. Migratory birds returned to nesting areas they'd abandoned years earlier. The lake that had been slowly dying under Cordelia's pollution was reborn, healthier than ever. My bridge, the catalyst for this entire war, was officially designated a state heritage landmark. A bronze plaque now marks the spot where one family's 40-year legacy triggered the restoration of an entire ecosystem. School groups visit monthly to learn about environmental stewardship and community resistance to corruption. The former resort property became the Willowmere Environmental Education Center, built on the foundation of Cordelia's criminal empire. The irony was perfect. The woman who'd tried to destroy our heritage left behind a legacy of environmental protection and community education. Her illegal conference center was converted into classrooms where children learn about water management, invasive species control, and the importance of protecting natural resources. The gazebo she'd built in protected wetlands became an observation platform for studying restored wildlife habitat. Margaret Weston was elected HOA president in a landslide victory, running on a platform of transparency and heritage protection. Her first act was rewriting our bylaws to prevent future corruption and protect longtime residents from displacement schemes. The HOA that had once threatened community character now actively preserves it. The annual Willowmere Heritage Festival draws thousands of visitors, celebrating the triumph of community values over corporate greed. Local businesses thrive on ecotourism and educational programs rather than exclusive luxury events. Property values increased 23% as people sought communities with strong environmental protection and democratic governance. Tommy Remy's engineering firm was hired to design similar water management systems for 3 neighboring lakes facing development pressure. Father Rodriguez established a nonprofit helping other communities fight HOA corruption. Danny McBride's construction company specializes in environmentally sustainable lakefront development. The broader impact exceeded anyone's expectations. State legislation now requires environmental impact assessments for all lakefront commercial development. Federal prosecutors use our case as a model for investigating political corruption disguised as community improvement. Law schools study grandfather's legal framework as an example of long-term strategic thinking. Cordelia received 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years probation and lifetime banishment from holding any HOA or municipal office. Her co-conspirators faced similar sentences, and the Luxury Development Consortium dissolved under federal investigation. Senator Hawkins lost her seat and her law license. But the most meaningful change was personal. My daughter visits every summer, swimming in waters cleaner than anything she'd known before. She's learning to fish from grandfather's bridge, understanding that some victories take generations to achieve, but last even longer. Last weekend, she asked about the plaque honoring grandfather's environmental vision. I told her the truth, that ordinary people can defeat corruption when they plan carefully, act legally, and never give up on their community's future. The bridge where he taught me to fish now teaches her the same lessons: patience, persistence, and the quiet satisfaction of building something meant to last. She's the 4th generation of Thornfields to call this lake home, and thanks to grandfather's 40-year plan, she won't be the last. What's your HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else fighting similar corruption. Community resistance works when people share strategies and support each other's battles. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about ordinary citizens defeating institutional power. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's making everything better for everyone. And remember, when bullies think they've won, that's usually when they discover what real power looks like. In Grandfather's workshop, patience was just another tool. And 40 years of patient preparation built something beautiful, a community where justice flows as freely as clean water.